It's now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. 30 years after its conception, the second Niger bridge has finally become a reality. The 1.6-kilometer bridge, named after Buhari, links the Delta State capital, Asaba, with Onitsha in Anambra State and other states in the southeast. It's one of 7 legacy projects virtually inaugurated by President Muhammadu Buhari on Tuesday. Rise correspondent Emeka Onwoye reports.
This is the second Niger bridge. It's a project by the federal government of Nigeria in collaboration with the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. It is a key national infrastructure with immense socio-economic benefits for the contiguous states and indeed the entire nation.
The projects that we hand over today symbolize our country's sharp focus on delivering prosperity. These bridges reduce travel time, improve business efficiency, and service delivery time.
Built at a cost of over 380 billion naira, the bridge will ease traffic flow around the Asaba axis in Delta State and Onitsha in Anambra State, and will improve road safety and create greater opportunities for local residents. It will also advance commercial viability of the immediate area and regenerate economic life.
The local Oweto bridge now reduces travel time to Abuja by 4 hours. And with the second Niger bridge, it will now take only a few minutes instead of hours to cross the River Niger, which is a crossing of approximately 1.5 kilometers. This is a story of development and a story of people, all of which cannot be fully told here.
The bridge covers a 1.6 kilometer length, 10.3 kilometer highway over interchange and a toll station.
This bridge, in actual fact, signifies the major handshake between the East and the West, and the East and the North. These are the people that use this bridge. So I have to say, Mr. President, we are all grateful.
It is our pleasure, overjoyed today in the Southeast, that we have come to take good for one of them, and the major one at that. And that is the second Niger bridge. President Muhammadu Buhari, I think as you leave office, the Southeast will remember you.
The bridge, conceived over 30 years ago, is now named President Muhammadu Buhari Bridge and will connect the 5 eastern states and other south-south states of the Federation. Emeka Onwoye, Arise News.
Also, 24 hours after the inauguration of the Dangote refinery, work has begun on a project which has the prospect of adding about 943 million barrels of oil to Nigeria's oil reserves. President Muhammadu Buhari flagged off the appraisal and exploration of the Wadi B drilling project in Borno State. Energy correspondent Georgina Ndukwe Izayaki tells us more.
The discovery of oil and gas in commercial quantities in the Lake Chad Basin in the northeastern part of Nigeria has been described as a huge revenue earner for the country. Now, oil exploration in the northeast was initially stalled for over 5 years due to insurgency, but with the level of stability now recorded, especially in Borno State, drilling activities has kicked off, as you can see right behind me. Now, this is Wadi community in Jere local government area of Borno State, where the flag off of the Wadi B drilling campaign is taking place.
Located 50 kilometers away from Maiduguri, the Borno State capital, Wadi B well is an appraisal and exploration well designed to appraise 7 hydrocarbon reservoir depth levels and to explore deeper reservoir targets of up to 14,000 feet. Geologists say there are potential reservoirs of hydrocarbon for oil and gas in commercial quantities here.
We are very optimistic because we reviewed the data. We also deployed new technology. Following the review of the data, we had new emerging technology which we deployed, including stress field detection, magnetotelluric, and we now combine it with the traditional seismic to come up with the well location.
Well, we hope to bring you a fuller video in the course of the show, perhaps on the program later on today. But Dr. Abati, we've looked at the second Niger bridge, finally commissioned, virtually though, and then, of course, a flagging of oil exploration in Borno.
Okay, I mean, in the remaining days of the administration, by Monday, we'll be talking about a new administration in Nigeria. The Buhari administration has been doing a lot, commissioning so many projects also. You've mentioned the Dangote refinery, you've mentioned the second Niger bridge at Onitsha, because indeed there are more bridges, across the Niger, the third largest river in Africa, or rather the third largest river in Africa. But, for convenience, people talk about second Niger bridge. But this is the second Niger bridge at Onitsha, linking Asaba in the west to Onitsha on the eastern side of the bridge, and linking the southwest and the southeast. And it's a very important, highly, valuable project. And we've been on this. We're told that the governors of the southeast have named the bridge after President Buhari. Well, government is a continuum. So after one administration, another administration comes in. So it's been the fortune, the privilege of President Muhammadu Buhari to have completed this project that is over 334 billion during his tenure. And so we're told that the bridge has been named after him. You recall that in December 2022, an attempt was made to open up, parts of that bridge. So, what we've been told now is that this has been completed. And the gains, for Nigerians is unimaginable, to the extent that it will further facilitate the linkage between the southwest and the southeast in terms of trade, in terms of personal relationships, in terms of freedom of movement. Before now, what we had was the steel bridge, between Asaba and Onitsha, which had been there since about 1969 or thereabouts. So what the government has done, understandably, gladdens the heart of everybody who uses, that particular route. I know the route very well. I haven't traveled on that same road for more than 4 or 5 years, and having used the same bridge, in recent times. So it's something that the people of the Southeast should be happy about, but not just the people of the Southeast, but everyone in the South, and perhaps all Nigerians. So President Buhari is in a good place to claim credit for this achievement. But I thought that in the process, it will also have been remarked that this project has been on since Shagari's time. When President Obasanjo came, President Obasanjo made it a priority. When President Yaradua came, President Yaradua also made it a special focus as part of the attempt by the federal government to reach out to the Southeast. Under President Jonathan, the contract financing, master plan, and all that, they were all worked out, and the construction started under President Jonathan. However, when President Buhari assumed office in 2015, he cancelled the projects that had been put in place by President Jonathan. And then, of course, he still made it a priority. And it is good for everyone involved that at this point, that bridge has become a reality. So it's in order to congratulate President Buhari. It's also in order to congratulate the people of the Southeast and to congratulate everyone who has been involved in this project. However, it was not the only thing that President Buhari commissioned, as the report pointed out. He did the Dangote project. He has also commissioned other bridges across the country. There's this bridge, Loweto Bridge, linking Nasarawa with the Federal Capital Territory for ease of movement. There is also, the Abuja-Kano Highway, which he also commissioned. There is also the Ecom Bridge, to facilitate operations the Calabar Freeport zone. And of course, the question I can ask at a personal level is, what about the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway? Because that has not been completed. And we were promised that will be completed expeditiously. But that has not happened. And that's another project that has gone through many administrations. But maybe it's also in order to congratulate and thank the ministry, the Federal Ministry of Works and Housing, under the watch of former governor of Lagos State, Minister Babatunde Raji Fashola. He had consistently promised that under his watch, these projects will be delivered. And what has been done in the last 2 days is President Buhari delivering on these major legacy projects. And it's a challenge to the incoming administration, with the hope that the Tinubu administration will just take off immediately from where this administration has stopped, because infrastructural projects is not something, this is not a target that only one government can deliver. As for the drilling in the Borno axis, well, we'll see. Okay, the only caveat to add there is that, all the relevant issues should be addressed, particularly the environment, the interest of the community, and also all those other issues that have been identified within the governance framework of the Petroleum Industry Act. But it will be remembered also that this happened under President Muhammadu Buhari. But, the assessment is a matter of time. It's Nigerians at the end of the day who will determine whether, their circumstances have improved or not. Because President Buhari has said that infrastructure development has been the focus of the government, particularly in terms of borrowing, the debt that we all talk about. And he has raised a question about transparency and accountability. Well, those are questions that will still have to be addressed. Will the Buhari administration have the courage to address those questions? President Buhari also said these projects would address the challenge of multidimensional poverty, and wealth creation. Well, I guess, yes, the bridge, the second Niger bridge at Onitsha, I keep emphasizing that, yes, we'll facilitate trade, within the South, but multidimensional poverty, with Nigeria facing a debt profile of over 77 trillion, with fuel subsidy crisis that has caused so much controversy, with nobody certain about, whether these issues will be addressed. Nigerians have this pattern. When a government leaves, they say, oh, the other government was better, performed better. Well, time will tell. History will point out where we are.
Well, we talk about legacy projects, and of course, with only a few more days to go until the current president, Muhammadu Buhari, gives way to the next administration, it is imperative that he begins to put his house in order. Indeed, he's been doing this now for the past few months and weeks to ensure that when looking back, there's a feeling of leaving a legacy. One of the things that this administration has boasted of a number of times is the development of infrastructure. In fact, say what you may, they would continue to push the fact that President Buhari was very particular about development of infrastructure. Little wonder why in the last few days he is keen to commission or inaugurate a number of projects. 7, as we've mentioned, he's inaugurated 3 bridges, 3 secretariats, and 1 road project. But we center on the second Niger bridge because of all the projects, this perhaps is the most prominent and the most celebrated for obvious reasons. It's taken a while. Dr. Bati has taken us through the history behind when it started from the Shagari administration and up until now, with the political will and provision of funds to ensure that it's come to life. So say what you may as to how far it has started. It's not who starts in many instances, it is who's finished. And who has finished in this case is President Muhammadu Buhari. And little wonder why governors across different party affiliations turned up for the inauguration and spoke very highly of the project as well as the president in terms of the relief it would bring to that particular axis. 1.6 kilometers of the bridge, 10.3 kilometers of highway, there's an Owerri interchange, and there's a potential toll. And so we must also recognize the fact that vehicles that would ply that route would perhaps be paying toll. We cannot speak enough about the importance of the benefits in terms of not just the ease for travelers on that axis, but also, of course, of movement of business and interactions in terms of businesses between the Asaba route and the Onitsha route. Very, very key, very important. One of the things I must also highlight is that I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago that the Presidential Communications team had released a document highlighting the president's achievements. And of course, chief of what they highlighted was his infrastructural development. However, looking back at his manifesto, that's the president's manifesto, when he ran first in 2015 and then in 2019, there were a number of key infrastructure developments he said he would do. So when you want to assess the success of a president or an administration, it's not just by the things that they do, which we have seen, and where he's named the bridge after himself, but it's benchmarked against what they say they will do and how well they did it. So for instance, if you're going to give an A, it will be out of what amount. If we're going to give 70% to give an A, 70 out of 100, 60 out of 100, or 8 out of 10. It depends on what the benchmark is. Then you begin to score the person either highly or not. So let's not forget campaign promises, because we're going to hold the next administration to account based on the things that they say now. Hence the reason why in the next few days we have been highlighting and examining again promises made by the president-elect, setting an agenda and ensuring that we hold them to account as to what they say they've done. Good enough. Second Niger Bridge was part of President Muhammadu Buhari's campaign promise, so he's done well. He scores very highly on that. But let's examine some of the other projects that he said, infrastructure that he said he will do. Of course, the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway is there. We were told that it would be completed by the end of April. It hasn't been done yet. And even though former Governor Fashola has been termed Mr. Infrastructure in terms of being the Minister of Works and Housing, he still has a few things left undone and a few promises left unkept. But let's look at some of the railway infrastructure that the president said he was going to perform. He said he would complete the Lagos-Ibadan Kano Rail. He said he would complete the Eastern Rail, that's the Port Harcourt-Maiduguri Rail. These were all the campaign promises he made. He said he would take that rail would take the network through Aba, all southeastern state capitals, Makurdi, Jos, Bauchi, Gombe, Coastal Rail. So he had really identified rail infrastructure as one of the highlights of his tenure. Unfortunately, we haven't seen all these completed. So in celebrating, which is very important, we must acknowledge that despite successive governments unable to achieve this, there were other promises he had said he made. Perhaps it would be good for Nigerians to hear the reasons why some of these projects were not done, so that for the next administration, they are able to fulfill their campaign promises. Well, moving on, a high-level presidential dialogue was the focus on day 2 of the African Development Bank annual meetings in Egypt. There, African leaders discussed the role of multilateral development banks within a changing global financial architecture. Arise business correspondent Rotus Odiri reports from the resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh.
The second day of the African Development Bank annual meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, had even more people than the first day. The sprawling Sharm el-Sheikh International Congress Center featured dignitaries and business people catching up, sharing ideas, and networking. It also featured robots, not just for entertainment, but also moving around the crowd and offering information and registration services for the sake of convenience.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies.
The main focus of day 2 was a presidential dialogue with 2 panel discussions on the role of multilateral banks amidst a shape-shifting global financial architecture. The President of Egypt, His Excellency Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, shared opening remarks while the Prime Minister of Egypt, Mustafa Madbouli, participated in the panel discussion. Other dignitaries from the African continent and even Europe were part of the day's events.
Private sector financing for green infrastructure in Africa.
Indeed, the global financial architecture, I think, needs to be overhauled. It is a fact that the current financial architecture is not delivering enough finances, enough technical support to Africa and indeed most other developing countries.
We also need to accelerate the regional payment system that the Afrexim Bank and the African Union and the AFCFTA Secretariat are implementing. That's the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System. Because what that then does is that it integrates the economy, integrates the 42 payment systems we have on the continent, helps us to get the circular economy to operate better.
On your question and on the reform of international financial system, let me mention that while we see scope to draw some common ambitions across the system, we also believe that each institution has its own challenges and Africa's unique needs must be taken into account. With this, I mean that first, the voice of Africa must be heard in defining development priorities and strategies for the years to come, and second, that each MDB should have its own and tailored reflection on how to evolve to better address ongoing challenges, including the global ones that were mentioned, climate, pandemic, and building on their expertise and capacity.
We need to know that we're living in a world where we have competing needs. And as you know, every country in Africa has its development plan, which was set before and sometimes aligned with the SDGs. But now we're suffering from some external shocks over which we don't have a control. So it means your development financing you have as a country, you have to share into two different parts. One, to achieve your development goals set before, and then also the other part to be used for, fighting and fixing those issues coming from external shocks, and that is a serious issue for us.
Infrastructure, especially in this part of the world, the African region, is very, very important to accelerate private investment. It lowers transactions cost for the private investors, and so it enhances the profitability of private investment, and that is what we're going to see. If you look at Sharm el-Sheikh here, is one good example of how the heavy physical infrastructure has encouraged private investors to come in. And that is what is going to create the momentum for development, the momentum for investment.
Addressing the finance gap is a top priority for the COP28 presidency and to my team. As a first step, developed nations need to live up to their historic responsibilities, and they must come through with the $100 billion in climate finance they pledged over a decade ago. There are encouraging signals coming from donor countries on this front, which I hope will soon be followed by real and concrete actions.
The African Development Bank annual meetings keeps rolling on. Today we had presidents, vice presidents, governors, prime ministers, a special envoy with an eye towards COP28 to keep the climate change chatter chugging, and also a special conversation on the role of multilateral banks in an ever-changing global financial world. A packed day two with a promise of more to come this week. From the private sector attracting Sharm el-Sheikh, Rotus Odiri, Arise News.
Well, thank you very much, Rotus. Dr. Bati, your thoughts?
Well, beyond the major theme of private sector mobilization to finance, climate change, the Green Initiative in Africa, the purpose of this 2023, the 54th General Meeting of the African Development Bank is also to provide an opportunity for African leaders to interact and, to come together to address climate finance and other challenges. So it's not surprising that on day two, you had these African leaders, making their comments on the role of multilateral development banks. The big objective of these multilateral development banks, of course, is to ensure sustainable growth, inclusive and sustainable growth. But for them to be able to do that successfully, you could see that in some of the contributions by the leaders that participated in that forum, they raised some of the issues. One will include the pooling of resources. And the African Development Bank does a good job in terms of this pooling of resources. Also, Afrexim Bank, after all, Afrexim Bank, we spoke about Afrexim Bank last week with regard to the Dangote refinery and what the Afrexim Bank did in that regard. And I saw Dr. Urama, Benedict Urama, yeah, that's him on the screen there, you know, as part of that dialogue. And it's interesting that it's also part of it. But one major challenge that also came out of that conversation is the need for these multilateral development banks not to work on one-size-fits-all approach, because in development economics, one size never fits all. Is to understand the peculiar needs of, you know, the recipient countries. Sometimes there's a mismatch in terms of, you know, the funding targets and also the peculiar needs of those countries. Now, it's when these multilateral development banks meet the peculiar needs that the people themselves can develop a sense of ownership, that the recipient countries can, you know, be more committed to participation in the process, you know. But you know, generally, the African Development Bank has been doing a lot, and you know, I don't need to go and be regurgitating the report by the AFDB in terms of what that bank has done, you know, by supporting these countries. But perhaps the most glaring example of what the AFDB has done, perhaps in ensuring sustainable and inclusive growth, will be what the AFDB did during COVID. And what the AFDB did in terms of infrastructure development. And also what we have seen the Afrexim Bank doing in terms of, you know, infrastructure development in parts of the continent. But of course, there are other frameworks under the auspices of the United Nations. The time will not permit me to go into the details of what these multilateral development banks can do. But there is evidence in terms of what they can contribute. But a lot more needs to be done. And ownership, participation, the pooling of resources, these are very important factors, in my view.
Absolutely. Now, as we know, the African Development Bank annual meetings is ongoing in Egypt, and we get daily reports from Road to Sunday 2 was an opportunity for heads of states to come together, still under the theme of maximizing financing, especially from the private sector, to tackle climate change. Climate change is the topic, a hot burner topic at the conference this year, the meetings this year. And the highlight was on, as we've mentioned, the role of multilateral development banks like the IMF, World Bank, and the AFDB itself in terms of coordinating finances, access to loans, ensuring that the drawing back from these loans are coordinated in such a way as to reflect the reality of the countries that make up the African continent. We had talked about it yesterday, that the concern, and in the report we saw one of the leaders that talk about the role of the developed nations and the concern that developing nations do not have what it takes in terms of finances and technology to tackle or push back with regards to climate change. Therefore, if they must be supported, especially with multilateral banks, then we must have conversations like this as to how they can best maximize this support and how they can tailor the needs or tailor their offerings to the needs of these member nations. It's just in the second day. We're looking forward to about 3 more days of conversations. It's a high-level conversation with Minister of Finances, the Ministers of Finance, governors of central banks around African continent and the world, and of course, multilateral development banks, agencies or agents also in Egypt. And so the outcome we're looking forward to is a concerted African response to climate change, especially from financing it. Because we talked about the trillions of dollars required to finance pushback of climate change or achieving the climate change charter. And if Africa must achieve this, then we must work together in unity. So these are some of the outcomes that we're looking forward to getting from the AFDB annual meeting.